I am not sure how I can follow that. So after hearing all of that, how many of you are getting ready to move? So the thing that you need to understand about what you just heard is the system that exists, each piece of it was put together as a reform. I mean, we talked about leadership PACs. There was a fellow who was a professor at Rutgers University, Dr. Alan Rosenthal, and he had come up with the idea of leadership PACs as a way of reforming the political system. And obviously at the time he thought this was going to work, but what we've seen is this fundamental unfairness. Right? If you want to give to anybody up here running for, say, an assembly seat or a council seat, you can give them $2,600. If any one of them up here was a county chair, you can give them $37,500. And so obviously there's an imbalance there, and most of the money now runs to these leadership PACs, which makes it very hard for any individual, whether you're on the line, off the line, part of the organization, not part of the organization. Most of the money flows to the leadership PACs. But I digress. First, I spent 22 years in elected office. I started out as a candidate for the General Assembly in 1993. I lost that election by 400 votes. And so I'm reminded every election that when people say every vote counts, that it does. Because in my case, there were 360 election districts, and I lost by 400 votes. So that's like 1 1/8 vote per district. And when you lose by that small a margin, you start thinking about all of the things that you didn't get to in that election and all of the people you missed. You change 200 people's minds and you get elected. One of the issues that, I mean, the things you talked about are issues that need to be fixed. But how do you fix them? You fix them with votes. And one of the things that we all struggle with are those votes. In the 2018 primary election, one of the most pivotal primaries in recent memory because everybody was reacting to the presidency of Donald Trump. People were energized, and we saw the results in November. We have an 11-1 congressional delegation. But what's mystifying is in the midst of that turmoil, in the midst of people being upset about who their president was and the things that were being said and the opportunity for change, only 13% of the people eligible to vote turned out in the primary. 13%. And so when you're talking about making change and you understand that that change has to happen at the beginning of the process, not the end, when you see so few people turn out, you understand that that's where the opportunity exists. Now, we get misled by ourselves. Everybody in this room, by definition, is not a normal person. I mean that in the best sense. Because unlike most of the people you see out on Kings Highway who are either going to the supermarket or maybe going out for dinner, they're not thinking about the things you're thinking about. They're just engaged in everyday life. They either have to take the kids to the doctors or maybe somebody to piano lessons or soccer, and the list goes on. They're just doing what they need to do to make their lives full in their sense. We think about the policy and the politics, and so sometimes we can lull ourselves into this belief that people know and understand the things that we know and understand. I'll give you an example, true story. So when I ran in 1993, and I came so close, I ran again in 1995. So I was out doing the same exact thing that I did in 93. I was in my hometown of Sayreville going door to door, and I stopped at a home, and I remember it was around dinner time. It was 5:30 or 6 o'clock, and I knocked on the door, and the woman came to the door, and I started, the usual door-to-door spiel. If any of you run, you know it, right? You see the person coming, so you get a little nervous, you take a deep breath, and out comes the speech. Hi, I'm John Wisniewski. I'm running for General Assembly. And before I could finish even that sentence, she had a dish towel in her hand, and she snapped it at me, and she said, "Don't give me that, young man." And I was at the top of the steps, and I was almost like falling backwards. And I said, but she, no. She said, "You were here 2 years ago. You made a lot of promises. You said you were going to do things, and I haven't heard from you. You haven't done anything." And then she put her hands on her hips in this self-satisfied way, and she said, "So what do you have to say about that?" And I said, "Well, I lost that election." It's a true story. And she said, "Oh, you did? Well, I'll vote for you." And so we believe that people believe what we believe and understand what we have to educate people. We have to explain to them. And it's not about telling them what's wrong with somebody else and what's wrong with some system. You have to tell them about what you will do and what you believe and how you're going to make it better, because that's what people respond to. And so I had the opportunity over those 22 years to engage with people and talk about what I would do. And it gave me the opportunity to run for governor in 2017. And for those of you who still have the Wiz stickers under your sweaters, thank you very much. I appreciate that. But one of the things I learned, and this is to the point that I think a lot of people are talking about, if you want to run, there are lots of hurdles. There are institutional hurdles. The organization, when I was running for governor, decided that they were going to galvanize behind a candidate, and that candidate happened to have a lot of money. And once that happens, it's an uphill struggle. Now, we raised $2.2 million. We got 22% of the vote in a primary election for governor. We won one county, Salem County, and we were the most efficient candidate because $2.2 million for 22% of the vote. The winner of the race got 44% for $22 million. So I was the most cost-effective candidate, but I realized too late that that's not how they judge winners. You have to actually have the most votes. But what it shows is that if you're willing to fight the fight, you can get people engaged. But you have to understand that you're not always going to be successful at first. They are going to make it hard for you to be successful. But the only way that this movement succeeds is if you keep at it and you build and you engage the people that live right next door to you, that you believe know exactly what you're doing and why, and they don't have a clue. That's what this has to be about, educating people about what makes you different, what makes the issues you support important, and how you're going to help them. And I wanted to be here today because I think that message often gets lost. It is about the problems we face, but it's more about how are we going to solve those problems? Who are the candidates that are going to fix those problems? And how do we tell people about those candidates? There's a lot of people who believe in this as being live streamed on Facebook. And it's a wonderful tool. You can advertise very cheaply. You can reach a lot of people very easily. But we shouldn't kid ourselves into believing that that's the solution. Because the only way you really get to people is when you talk to them face to face. When I first ran for the assembly in 1993, everybody in my district said, you know, the bosses have decided that it's not your turn. People invited me for breakfast, lunch, and dinner to put their hand on my shoulder and say, you're a great guy, John, but, you know, it's not your turn. You need to wait. There'll be another time for you. But I did something that they weren't thinking about. In the 19th district when I ran, there were 360 committee men and women, and they made the decision in a voting machine with a secret ballot. I went door to door to 360 households and sat in the living rooms of 360 committee people. And many of them, I found, didn't really know what was going on, didn't really appreciate the process, didn't really understand the choices. And if I hadn't done that, there's somebody that would have said, well, here's what we're doing. Here's what the team's going to do, and we'd love it if you came along. But if you get out and you talk to people, and it's a lot of work. I mean, I did this in a day before GPS and MapQuest and all these things. I had big Hagstrom maps with strings and lines and everything on it. And, you know, you had to find your way around the neighborhood. But when you're in somebody's living room, when you're at the doorstep and you're talking to them about what's important to you, how you're going to make their life different, how you're going to help lift people up. And we've got no end of issues. I mean, we could talk about the pension crisis in New Jersey. We could talk about health care. We can talk about transportation. Anybody love New Jersey Transit? No, I didn't think so. These are issues that need to be fixed, but they need people to fix it. They need advocates to stand up for it. And that's what we all can be. Whether you're advocating for yourself as a candidate, whether you're advocating for your best friend who's a candidate, whether you're advocating for single-payer health care, it is a person-to-person business. There is no substitute for that. And I wanted to be here today to tell you that I'm willing to be part of that with you, to help out, because we need to make change in New Jersey. All the reforms that we have that were supposed to be improvements, all didn't work. But we can still make those changes. When we think about the only 13% turning out in 2018, and what a different world it would be if 23%, just 10% more showed up, what a different world we could make. It's up to all of us. Let's do it together, and I look forward to being there with you. Thank you very much.